This is fun. This was a recent publication. This was came out about 3 or 4 months ago. Ephesus. It was a famous place back in the old times for gladiator fights. They had coliseums and so on. And as a result, they had lots of gladiators. And well, what they were doing, what these archaeologists did is they were digging things up, as archaeologists do, and they found a grave site about 200 square feet. And in that grave site, they found 60 gladiators. And they analyzed these gladiators. In this case, they looked at the bones of the gladiators, and they looked at the mineral content, and they found they had a low zinc, high strontium content, which indicated that their diet was very, very, very vegetarian. In fact, they called it vegan, the gladiators. And they compared them with people that were buried outside and who weren't gladiators, and of course they found their diet was a bit richer. So the guy who did this was kind of interesting, and it kind of shows you how far people will go to explain their biases. What this confirmed was something that had been written throughout history, you can find in many stories of gladiators of the past, is that the gladiator lived on barley. In fact, they called the gladiator the barley men. Now think about it for a minute. Your job is to fight and kill or you die. So are you going to make the effort to be as efficient as possible? Of course you are. And so the gladiators, they lived on the most efficient fuel that made them the strongest and the best fighters that they could possibly be. So they ate barley. So they were the barley men. Okay, they're the barley men. Everybody knows this. This excavation proved they were barley men. Without a doubt, they were vegans. So what this author did was kind of interesting. He said, he made up this whole story. You can go read it. It's on the internet. He made up this whole story that was kind of interesting. He said, now we have evidence to prove that gladiators were obese. Because they lived on barley. Anybody who eats starch is fat, right? And the reason that they were fat, he explains, is it made a better show. When they got in the Colosseum and they went slicing back and forth to each other, they could cut a big flab of blubber, and they could bleed a lot and have lots of blubber hanging out and not die. So it made a better show, and that's why the gladiators ate barley, so they could be fat. That's what he says. And then when they analyzed the bones of these gladiators, they found them to be really, really strong. And he couldn't explain how people would get strong bones without eating dairy, because they were vegans. And so what he went and he did next, and you can read this is just hilarious. What he said next is he said the reason that they had strong bones is because they had this particular habit of eating charred wood and bone ash. Come on. The reason they had strong bones is because they ate a diet of barley. Now, I went looking for fat gladiators. And the best I could do is some mosaics that were done back in those times, and I didn't find any, well, this guy's a little big, but that's probably mostly muscle. I couldn't find any fat gladiators. So when you have a friend or a relative who goes to the gym and pumps all these big weights and talks about how he or she has to be strong and eat lots of protein, eat whey powders and soy powders and so on, you tell them that's not what the barley men did. I mean, the barley men, the strongest men in historical record, the gladiators, they didn't eat those things. Roman soldiers, they would ask their commanders if they would withhold the meat before they went into battle because they knew that it made a difference as far as winning or losing the battle if they could continue on their starch-based diet. Greatest conquests in the world that have ever occurred were accomplished by primarily men who lived on starch-based diets. For example, Alexander the Great conquered the known world of his time. And the soldiers were fueled by corn. They called it corn. But corn wasn't maize. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about wheat and barley and rye. That's what they ate. And Genghis Khan did the same thing. Conquered the known world, and his men were fueled by starch.